From burning hundreds of people alive, to losing entire kingdoms through sheer stupidity, to being brutally murdered by their own wives, these are the 10 worst kings and queens in British history. Bloody Mary. Mary Tudor became queen in 1553 with one plan: make England Catholic again. Her father, Henry VIII, had left the Catholic Church and her brother, Edward VI, had made England Protestant, but Mary wanted to change this back. Her solution was brutal: burn anyone who wouldn't become Catholic. Starting in 1555, Mary's men began killing Protestants by fire. They burned church leaders and ordinary people who refused to give up their Protestant beliefs. Over 4 years, about 280 people were burned alive in town squares across England. Mary thought the fear would make England Catholic again, but she was wrong. The burnings just made people hate her more, to the point that they started calling her Bloody Mary. And while Mary was busy burning people, France took Calais from England in 1558. This was England's last piece of land in Europe, and losing it was a huge embarrassment. Mary died without children in 1558. Her Protestant sister Elizabeth became queen and undid everything Mary had done. Mary's 5 years as queen achieved nothing except death and shame. But religious violence was nothing compared to what came next. The martyr despot. Charles I became king in 1625, believing God had chosen him to rule without limits. He thought Parliament existed only to give him money. Charles ruled for 11 years without calling Parliament at all. He raised taxes through old laws that nobody used anymore. He arrested people who refused to pay and threw them in prison without trial. When his enemies complained, Charles ignored them. By 1642, Parliament had enough. They raised an army to fight the king. Charles raised his own army to fight back. For the next 6 years, England tore itself apart in civil war. Families split. Towns burned and over 200,000 people died. Charles lost the war in 1648 and Parliament put him on trial for treason against his own people. Charles refused to recognize the court, saying kings only answered to God. So on January 30th, 1649, they chopped off his head. England abolished the monarchy completely, and for 11 years the country was ruled by Parliament and army generals. But at least Charles believed in something, because this next king believed in nothing. The Mad King. Henry VI became king when he was just 9 months old. This should have been the first warning sign. By the time he grew up, he had no idea how to be a king. Henry was weak, easily manipulated, and suffered from mental breakdowns that left him staring into space for months at a time. During one breakdown in 1453, he didn't even recognize his own wife or newborn son. His state was so dire that his nobles had to make decisions for him. While Henry was ill, England was losing the 100 Years' War against France. The English had controlled huge parts of France for over a century. Under Henry, they lost almost everything. By 1453, only the port of Calais remained in English hands. Henry's weakness also triggered a civil war at home. Powerful nobles saw that a king couldn't stop them from fighting each other. The War of the Roses began in 1455. With 2 families battling for control of England, and the country bled for 30 years. Henry was captured, rescued, captured again, and finally murdered in the Tower of London in 1471. But mental illness was an excuse. Our next king was perfectly sane and still ruined everything. The narcissistic tyrant. Richard II became king at 10. He handled the peasants' revolt bravely when he was just 14. But by his 30s, Richard believed he was chosen by God and didn't need to listen to anyone. Richard surrounded himself with yes-men. He made people kneel before him and call him Your Majesty. In 1397, he arrested his own nobles and seized their lands. Some he executed without trial. Others he banished from England forever. Richard packed Parliament with his supporters and gave himself unlimited power. When his cousin Henry Bolingbroke was cheated out of his inheritance, Richard made a fatal mistake. He went to Ireland to fight a war, leaving England undefended. Henry invaded and found the whole country ready to rebel against Richard. Richard returned to find his kingdom gone. Henry locked him in a castle and starved him to death in 1400. And Richard's actions started a century of civil wars that would tear England apart. At least Richard was obviously crazy. Our next king seemed normal, but failed just as badly. The weak spendthrift. Henry III became king when he was 9 years old and ruled for 56 years. This should have been England's golden age. Instead, it was 56 years of constant failure. Henry let foreign advisors run his kingdom. First came his mother's French relatives, then his wife's family from Provence. English nobles watched foreigners get the best jobs, the richest lands, and the king's ear. Henry didn't care what his own people thought. Henry was also losing England's territories in France. His father John had already lost Normandy, but Henry managed to lose almost everything else. By 1259, England controlled only a tiny piece of southwestern France called Gascony. Centuries of English rule in France were gone. Henry wasted enormous amounts of money on failed projects, like trying to make his son Edmund the King of Sicily. The plan failed completely, but Henry kept sending gold anyway. He borrowed money from Italian bankers and couldn't pay it back. By 1258, Henry's nobles had enough. They forced him to accept limits on his power, but when Henry tried to ignore this agreement, it triggered another civil war. But at least Henry was just incompetent, because the next king was actively treasonous, the Nazi sympathizer. Edward VIII became king in January 1936 and seemed like a modern, charming monarch. This should have been Britain's fresh start after decades of stuffy royalty tradition. Instead, Edward lasted 11 months and nearly destroyed the monarchy forever. Edward's first problem was Wallis Simpson, an American woman who had divorced twice. The Church of England wouldn't let their supreme governor marry a divorced woman, but Edward didn't care. He chose love over duty and abdicated in December 1936, throwing Britain into a constitutional crisis. But Edward's real betrayal came during World War II. While Britain fought for its life against Nazi Germany, Edward was meeting with Hitler and staying with suspected German agents in Portugal. He allegedly suggested that Germany should bomb Britain into peace, the strategy that became the Blitz. Edward's Nazi sympathies ran so deep that Hitler planned to restore him as a puppet king if Germany conquered Britain. Only Edward's brief reign saved him from treason charges after the war. But at least Edward's treason was brief. Our next king betrayed England for decades, the Dane payer. Athelred became King of England in 978 when he was about 12 years old. His nickname, the Unready, doesn't mean unprepared, but poorly advised. This should have been a warning about what was coming. Athelred's biggest problem was Vikings. Danish raiders kept attacking England, burning towns and stealing everything valuable. Athelred's solution was simple: pay them to go away. These payments were called dangeld, and they were enormous, sometimes 48 pounds of silver at once. The plan backfired completely because instead of leaving England alone, the Vikings realized they had found the perfect victim. They just kept coming back for more money. Each payment just made them greedier. In 1002, Athelred tried a different approach. He ordered the massacre of all Danes living in England on the same day. Among the victims was Gondelheid, sister of the Danish king Cewin Forkbeard. Cewin, seeking revenge, invaded England in 1013 and conquered the entire country. Athelred fled to France in exile as he had literally paid for his own defeat. But at least Athelred tried to fight back. Our next king just gave up. Tomb Tabard. John Balliol became King of Scotland in 1292, but only because Edward I of England chose him. This should have been Scotland's chance for independence after years without a king. Instead, Balliol became England's puppet. Edward I had demanded the right to choose Scotland's new king when the royal line died out. He picked Balliol because he thought John would be easy to control. Edward was right. From day one, Balliol did whatever the English king told him. Edward treated Balliol like a servant, not a king. He forced John to appear in English courts as a defendant. He overruled Scottish legal decisions. He even made Balliol provide soldiers for England's wars against France. By 1296, Scottish nobles had enough of their humiliated king. They made an alliance with France against England. But when Edward I invaded Scotland, Balliol immediately surrendered without a fight. Edward I publicly stripped Balliol of his royal symbols in front of a crowd. They tore the royal arms off his surcoat, giving him the name Tomb Tabard, empty coat. Scotland lost its independence completely, and it took decades of brutal warfare under William Wallace and Robert the Bruce to undo Balliol's cowardice. But losing independence was nothing compared to losing an entire empire. The Empire Destroyer. John Lackland became king in 1199 and inherited the largest empire in Europe: England, Ireland, Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine. John's empire stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees, but within 15 years, almost all of it was gone. John's first mistake was murdering his own nephew. Arthur of Brittany had a better claim to the throne than John did, so in 1203, John had the 16-year-old boy killed, probably with his own hands. This shocked even medieval nobles and destroyed John's legitimacy. The French king Philip Augustus saw his chance. He invaded Normandy in 1204 while John sat in England doing nothing. Castle after castle surrendered without a fight. Within months, the English had lost Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and most of their French territories. But John's failures weren't just military. In 1208, Pope Innocent III excommunicated him and placed all of England under interdict. No church services, no marriages, no burials for 6 years. England was cut off from God. By 1215, John's own nobles had enough. They forced him to sign the Magna Carta, limiting royal power forever. John died during a civil war the next year, with French armies invading England. But losing an empire was still better than what came next. The Disaster King. Edward II became king in 1307 and inherited the most powerful kingdom in Europe. His father, Edward I, had conquered Wales and nearly conquered Scotland. England was rich, strong, and feared across Europe. Edward II destroyed it all. Edward's first act as king was recalling his band lover, Piers Gaveston, from exile. While Scotland rebelled under Robert the Bruce, Edward was too busy sharing his bed and crown with Gaveston to care. When furious nobles murdered Gaveston in 1312, Edward just found a new favorite, Hugh Despenser. In 1314, Edward led the largest English army in decades to crush the Scottish rebels at Bannockburn. Robert the Bruce had fewer than 7,000 men. Edward had over 20,000. The English were completely destroyed and Scotland was free forever. Edward's reign spiraled into civil wars, bankruptcy, and chaos. By 1326, even his own wife Isabella had enough. She invaded England with her lover Roger Mortmire and disposed Edward within months. Edward II died horribly in Berkeley Castle in 1327, allegedly murdered with a red-hot poker. His 20-year reign had cost England an entire kingdom, destroyed royal finances, and left the country in ruins. No other British monarch combined personal, military, political, and financial failure on such an epic scale.